In the United States Supreme Court, a profound shift is underway, one that's not just procedural, but deeply transformative for the nation's legal landscape. This change is rapidly reshaping American law and life, affecting not only the legal community, but also the daily experiences of millions of citizens. Emergency rulings, which were once reserved for the most extraordinary circumstances, have now become a primary tool for settling major policy disputes. These decisions often bypass the traditional deliberative process that once defined the court's approach. The court acts swiftly, often in the dead of night, issuing decisions that can instantly alter the course of national policy, impacting everything from food assistance programs to the very structure of government itself. In just the first 20 weeks of 2025, the Trump administration filed 19 emergency applications, more than double the number submitted in the previous 16 years combined, highlighting the scale and speed of this new era. This isn't a statistical blip, it's a strategic shift, signaling a new willingness to bypass slower appeals in favor of rapid Supreme Court intervention. The stakes are higher, and the pace is faster than ever before. The court now sits at the center of nearly every major political battle, with its rulings touching millions of lives in deeply personal and sometimes unexpected ways. These decisions determine access to food, job security, and the fate of immigrants, real consequences for real people whose futures can change overnight with a single order. The gavel falls quietly, but its impact is seismic, reshaping the American landscape before our eyes and ushering in a new era of judicial power and urgency. The shadow docket refers to the Supreme Court's use of emergency orders and summary decisions, rulings made quickly, often without public argument or detailed explanation. Unlike the slow, transparent merits docket, shadow docket cases are decided in days or hours, with limited briefing and no oral arguments. The court often issues brief, unsigned orders, sometimes with no reasoning at all, leaving the public and lower courts guessing. Historically, this docket was reserved for urgent procedural matters, not sweeping policy changes. But now, the court increasingly uses it to decide major controversial cases, bypassing the usual checks and balances. Lower courts are overruled without full hearings, and the public is left in the dark about the legal rationale. This shift prioritizes speed and secrecy over deliberation and transparency. The shadow docket has become a powerful, controversial tool, raising fundamental questions about fairness and accountability. Justice in the shadows is justice denied. The Supreme Court's 6-3 conservative majority has become one of the most defining features of the current judicial landscape. This majority is central to the rise of shadow docket rulings, decisions made quickly, often without full briefings or oral arguments, and sometimes with little explanation. The 6 conservative justices frequently vote as a unified bloc, creating a reliable majority that has consistently favored the administration's emergency requests, especially on high-stakes issues. Since early 2025, the court has sided with the administration in 20 out of 23 shadow docket cases, a striking trend that has not gone unnoticed by legal scholars and the public alike. This dynamic emboldens the executive branch, which now approaches the court with the expectation of a sympathetic hearing, knowing it has a strong chance of prevailing in urgent matters. Meanwhile, the 3 liberal justices frequently dissent, warning that the court is too quick to grant emergency relief and is abandoning its traditional role as a neutral arbiter, raising concerns about fairness and transparency. The consistent 6-3 split highlights a deep philosophical divide, not just over policy outcomes, but over the very nature of the court's responsibilities and its use of emergency powers in shaping national policy. When rulings fall along clear partisan lines, especially in secretive or expedited orders, public trust in the court's impartiality and legitimacy begins to erode, fueling debate and protest. The question looms larger than ever. Is the Supreme Court still serving as a vital check on government power, or has it become an instrument of it, shaped by ideology rather than principle? Supreme Court emergency rulings have immediate, profound consequences. When the administration moved to suspend SNAP benefits during a government shutdown, the court's shadow docket left millions unsure if they could buy groceries. On immigration, the court allowed the end of protections for Venezuelans, enabled ethnicity-based stops, and approved mass revocations of parole. Decisions issued with little explanation, upending lives and families. The court also permitted executive orders, reducing the federal workforce, and firing independent commission members, concentrating power in the presidency. For workers, this means lost jobs and instability. For the nation, it erodes independent institutions. Even fundamental rights are at stake. The court allowed the denial of gender-affirming passports and the termination of transgender service members, without full briefing or argument. These shadow docket rulings are not just procedural, they carry a real, often painful, human cost. The court's emergency actions are reshaping lives, not just laws. The court's 3 liberal justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, have issued urgent and passionate dissents, warning of the dangers posed by the shadow docket. Their voices have become increasingly prominent as the court's use of this process has grown, and they have not hesitated to sound the alarm about what they see as a threat to the court's integrity and the nation's constitutional balance. Justice Kagan, in particular, has criticized the majority for issuing major unsigned orders without explanation, arguing that this practice undermines the court's credibility and leaves the public in the dark about the reasoning behind critical decisions. She warns that such secrecy erodes trust in the judiciary and makes it harder for Americans to understand the law. The dissents warn that the court is becoming too deferential to the executive branch, abdicating its duty as a vital check on presidential power. By allowing the executive to act without proper judicial scrutiny, the justices argue, the court risks upsetting the careful balance of powers that is fundamental to American democracy. Justice Sotomayor calls this trend a grave constitutional threat, warning that it tips the balance of power dangerously toward the president and away from the judiciary. She emphasizes that the court's willingness to bypass its own procedures could have lasting consequences for the separation of powers. The dissenters argue that the shadow docket shortcuts the normal deliberative process, disregarding the careful work of lower courts and risking rushed, flawed decisions. They stress that bypassing full briefing and oral argument means important issues may not receive the attention and scrutiny they deserve. Justice Jackson warns that lower courts' efforts become just a dress rehearsal for unexplained Supreme Court orders, leaving judges and litigants uncertain about the law and undermining confidence in the judicial process. These are not just legal disagreements, they are urgent warnings about the erosion of transparency, deliberation, and judicial restraint. The dissenters believe that the court's legitimacy depends on open reasoning and careful process, not on secrecy and speed. The dissents are a plea to recognize the damage being done to the rule of law before it's too late, urging the court to return to its traditions of openness, accountability, and respect for the constitutional order. The shadow docket's impact is felt in homes, workplaces, and communities across America. When the court allows the suspension of food stamps, a mother must choose between rent and groceries. When protected status for immigrants ends, families face deportation to countries they barely know. Allowing the firing of federal employees without cause weakens institutions meant to protect consumers, workers, and the environment. The lack of transparency breeds uncertainty and distrust, making justice seem like a political tool. This erosion of public trust is perhaps the most damaging consequence. Democracy depends on faith in fair, impartial institutions. The shadow docket threatens the promise of checks and balances, shifting power toward the executive branch. Every American's rights, security, and faith in democracy are at stake. The surge in shadow docket rulings has thrust the Supreme Court into the spotlight, demanding greater transparency. The court must return to providing clear, reasoned explanations for decisions that affect millions. Unsigned, unexplained orders are not enough when rights and livelihoods hang in the balance. Accountability is crucial. Lifetime appointments should not shield justices from scrutiny or unchecked power. The public, press, and Congress must monitor the court's actions and demand explanations. The shadow docket is now a powerful force shaping policy. Understanding and oversight are essential. The future of justice depends on restoring deliberation, transparency, and restraint. The watchful eye of the public is more important than ever, demanding better from our highest court.